Awaken your spirit, chosen ones. Power doesn't announce itself, it observes. Somewhere above your pay grade, outside your field of vision, a quiet recalculation happened. Not because you made noise, not because you tried to impress, but because a few dots suddenly connected in a way that made someone pause longer than they planned to. That pause matters. History, organizations, and even personal empires don't shift when people shout. They shift when someone notices a pattern that shouldn't exist yet. There's a documented reality behind this. Decision makers don't track everyone, only anomalies. Consistent predictability gets ignored. Unexpected coherence gets flagged. When behavior, results, and restraint line up too neatly, attention follows whether you asked for it or not. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Fixation doesn't start with admiration, and it doesn't start with fear. It starts with confusion. You didn't rise the way the spreadsheet said you would. You didn't react the way experience said you should. You didn't need the usual fuel, validation, visibility, or permission. And when someone high up realizes they can't explain you using their old formulas, curiosity turns into observation, and observation turns into focus. Not dramatic focus, strategic focus, the kind that happens quietly while everyone else is busy chasing applause. And yes, there's a strange humor in it. You're just living your life, minding your progress, maybe even underestimating yourself a little, while somewhere else a serious adult with a serious title is squinting at the metaphorical chart like, that doesn't make sense. Run that again. You didn't break anything. You didn't storm the gates. You simply didn't fit neatly. And that's exactly what pulled the spotlight your way. This isn't about ego. It's about pattern recognition. And once you're recognized as a pattern worth watching, the game subtly changes. Number 1. Your pattern broke a rule they rely on. Every system, no matter how powerful or polished it looks from the outside, survives on patterns. People at the top don't personally manage everything. They manage expectations. They know how long growth should take, how ambition usually shows itself, how pressure normally bends people. Those expectations become rules, even when no one writes them down. When you moved in a way that didn't match those rules, it wasn't impressive at first. It was unsettling. You didn't react where reaction was expected. You didn't slow down where friction usually works. You didn't overreach when opportunity showed up, and you didn't shrink when resistance appeared. That kind of behavior doesn't register as talent right away. It registers as a flaw in the model. And people who operate at higher levels don't ignore flaws in their models. They investigate them. What really caught attention wasn't speed or confidence. It was consistency without the usual signals. Most people telegraph their next move through emotion, urgency, or ego. You didn't. Your actions lined up over time in a way that couldn't be explained by luck or mood. When outcomes repeat without obvious effort or noise, it suggests intention. Intention suggests awareness. Awareness suggests someone who sees more than they're supposed to. This is where fixation begins. Not because you threatened anyone directly, but because you disrupted prediction. When someone can't predict you, they can't manage you the usual way. Influence depends on anticipation. Control depends on expectation. You quietly stepped outside both. That forces those watching to pay closer attention, to look backward at what they missed, and forward at what you might do next. The uncomfortable part is this. You didn't need to challenge authority to trigger interest. You simply operated from a different internal rulebook. That difference exposed how fragile the existing one actually is. Once that happens, you don't get unseen again. Not because you demanded notice, but because you became the exception their system wasn't built to handle. Number 2. You solved something without permission. Every structure runs on an unspoken agreement. Problems move up before they move forward. That delay is how authority protects itself. When you stepped around that process and fixed something anyway, you didn't just solve a problem, you skipped a ritual. And skipping rituals is what gets noticed. You didn't wait for approval, a green light or a meeting invite. You saw a gap, understood it, and closed it. Not loudly, not rebelliously, just effectively. To you, it probably felt normal, even practical. To someone higher up, it felt like a breach in the chain they rely on to keep things predictable. Here's why that matters. Permission isn't just about order, it's about visibility and control. When solutions travel the approved route, they can be tracked, credited, and managed. When a solution appears fully formed without that trail, it raises eyebrows. The outcome is there, but the leverage points are missing. That makes people uneasy. What really shifts attention is that you didn't do it to prove anything. You weren't trying to stand out. You weren't making a statement. You simply acted from competence instead of compliance. That's a rare signal. Most people hesitate, not because they can't solve the problem, but because they're waiting to be allowed to be capable. You didn't wait. From the outside, this reads as quiet authority. It suggests you trust your judgment more than the process, and you trust results more than recognition. That combination is powerful and slightly dangerous to rigid systems. It implies that if something truly matters, you'll move whether or not someone formally hands you the baton. This is where fixation starts to take shape. Not because you broke rules loudly, but because you proved you don't need them to be effective. Someone higher up begins to wonder how often you're doing this, what else you see that others don't, and how much influence you could have if you decided to scale that behavior. You didn't ask to lead. You didn't ask to disrupt. You just handled what was in front of you. And in doing so, you showed that permission was never the limiting factor. That realization tends to linger in powerful minds longer than praise ever does. Number 3, you advanced without visible leverage. Most people rise because someone pushes them, backs them, or validates them. They have sponsors, alliances, or a network that carries their influence forward. You didn't. You moved in ways that weren't obvious, without a loud team cheering, without a mentor announcing your next step. Yet you still advanced. That kind of movement catches attention because it defies the usual rules of power. When someone progresses without the visible scaffolding everyone expects, it forces a deeper look. People start asking, how is this happening? And they don't like not knowing. Your growth appeared self-sufficient, almost natural. Tasks got done, results stacked up, and obstacles either vanished or were quietly bypassed. There was no visible army behind you, no conventional leverage to explain why outcomes bent your way. That's unsettling, because authority thrives on predictability. If someone moves forward the way you did, it exposes cracks in the system, the rules about influence, the expectations about loyalty, the assumptions about who can and cannot succeed. You proved that progress isn't always controlled, and unpredictability at that level is hard to ignore. The real intrigue lies in restraint. You didn't flaunt what you were doing. You didn't parade your independence or make it obvious that you were bypassing the usual channels. That subtlety amplifies the impact. People at the top notice patterns of quiet, autonomous progress because it's the hardest to track and the easiest to misread. Unlike noise or grand gestures, understated competence forces them to account for every variable, including ones they didn't anticipate. Advancing without visible leverage suggests one thing above all. Your influence isn't borrowed. It's earned. You aren't playing the game by the same rules as everyone else, and that unpredictability makes you impossible to ignore. When someone in power sees that pattern, fixation is inevitable. Not because they want to control you, but because your trajectory refuses to fit into the neat, controllable systems they rely on. And once you've crossed that threshold, you become a person to watch, quietly and continuously, whether you like it or not. Number 4, your thinking scaled faster than your position. There's a clear expectation in any hierarchy about how far someone should see, how much influence they should hold, and how quickly their ideas should stretch. Positions act like lenses. They define the scope of vision and the weight of decisions. When your thinking moves faster than your role allows, it creates a kind of tension that doesn't go unnoticed. People higher up start registering it because the disconnect between capability and title is impossible to ignore. You likely made connections, noticed patterns, or suggested solutions that your position didn't justify. To those observing, it looks like you're operating ahead of the curve, a step or two beyond where anyone thought you would be. That triggers both intrigue and caution. Intrigue, because ideas that arrive early are often game-changing. Caution, because they challenge the predictability of the system. If someone can think and act faster than their station, the usual controls don't work anymore. What sets this apart is subtlety. You're not announcing brilliance. You're not forcing recognition. You're moving at your own mental pace, aligning understanding and action naturally, and producing results before anyone has time to adjust expectations. That quiet acceleration is disarming. It forces people in authority to reassess the rules they rely on, to account for someone who sees more, calculates faster, and anticipates shifts that others only notice after the fact. The most compelling aspect of this is the imbalance it exposes. Organizations and hierarchies operate on timing, not just competence. They assume growth happens in stages, that experience and insight accumulate predictably. When you surpass that pace, you make the system's assumptions obvious. People notice that you aren't constrained by the timeline they've set, and that makes you impossible to ignore. Ultimately, thinking faster than your position signals potential that can't be contained. It doesn't matter if you're polite, quiet, or cautious. Once someone high up realizes your ideas are moving ahead of your authority, they fixate. Not out of fear, not immediately out of admiration, but out of necessity. They need to understand the trajectory of someone who could redefine the rules while appearing to just be doing their job. Number 5. You made competence look effortless. There's a quiet kind of alarm that goes off when someone makes difficult work seem natural. Most people struggle, stumble, or over-explain. Effort is visible, mistakes are visible, and that makes them predictable. You didn't operate that way. You handled complexity with a calm, unshakable efficiency that suggested mastery, not struggle. That kind of competence is disarming, not because it's flashy, but because it exposes the gap between what people expect and what you deliver. Effortless performance is dangerous in the eyes of someone observing from above. It signals that skill isn't tied to hierarchy or approval. You didn't need constant guidance, validation or validation loops to get results. You didn't panic under pressure, make excuses, or rely on external crutches. That independence and precision silently communicates power, and those who notice it start paying attention immediately. Not because they're impressed, but because they're forced to question their assumptions about control and predictability. What makes this fixation stronger is subtlety. You didn't brag about it. You didn't make mistakes obvious to highlight growth. You just delivered again and again, and it looked effortless. The tension this creates is internal for observers. They know that anyone can struggle, but when someone consistently doesn't, it undermines the narrative they rely on to measure competence. You become a benchmark they didn't set and can't ignore. The real impact lies in restraint. Effortless skill is often paired with quiet discretion, and that combination is hard to read, impossible to predict, and difficult to manipulate. When someone above notices it, their attention lingers. They start tracing patterns, analyzing your methods, and anticipating moves. What started as casual observation slowly evolves into fixation, not because you demanded recognition, but because your natural execution disrupts expectations and shows a level of capability that can't be filed away neatly. Effortlessness doesn't scream, it signals. And once that signal is recognized at the top, it carries weight, respect, and cautious scrutiny. You didn't need to fight for notice. The way you operate guaranteed it. Number 6. You didn't need proximity to influence outcomes. Influence is usually measured by who you know, who sits next to you, and who can hear your voice. Most people assume that being present, visible, or physically close is what moves the needle. You didn't play by that rule. You affected results without being in the inner circle, without being seen at every meeting, without needing to insert yourself into every conversation. That kind of reach is subtle, almost invisible, yet incredibly powerful. It forces people watching to pay attention because it breaks the usual assumptions about how control works. Your impact wasn't dependent on access. You weren't leveraging relationships to push decisions, or borrowing authority to create momentum. Instead, you moved things forward through clarity, timing, and understanding of the system that others thought only insiders could manipulate. That's unsettling to those in higher positions because it undermines the structures they rely on. Influence isn't supposed to flow from someone outside the circle, but you proved it could, and did, repeatedly. The intrigue lies in how effortless it looks. You didn't need constant visibility or affirmation. You didn't shout your wins or broadcast your insights. The outcomes spoke for themselves, and that's what makes people fixated. When someone sees results without the expected noise, it triggers curiosity and caution. They start asking how you're doing it, what connections you might secretly have, and whether the system is somehow underestimating you. This kind of influence is rare because it's built on understanding, not position. You see the leverage points, the unseen pathways, and the hidden mechanics that actually move things forward. Operating from that perspective means you can affect the outcome without the usual trappings of power, and that independence is both impressive and alarming. Once someone high up recognizes that proximity isn't required for you to make an impact, their attention shifts. They no longer watch only your visible actions. They start tracking your patterns, anticipating your next move, and quietly evaluating how far your influence can reach. You became someone whose presence isn't defined by where you are, but by what you accomplish, and that makes you impossible to ignore. Number 7. You exposed a weakness by not exploiting it. Most people react to opportunity in the same predictable way. They see an opening and take it, often loudly and aggressively. You didn't. You noticed gaps, vulnerabilities, and weak points, but instead of using them for personal gain, you simply acknowledged them and moved with restraint. That restraint is what makes someone at the top notice you. It's unsettling because it signals awareness, discipline, and strategic patience, all qualities that can't be easily categorized or controlled. By not exploiting the weakness, you did something unexpected. You revealed the structure of the system without threatening it outright. You demonstrated that you understand the rules deeply enough to bend them, yet choose not to. That's a rare combination. Most people either stumble blindly through weakness or exploit it recklessly. You did neither. Your actions, or lack of obvious exploitation, highlighted insight in a way that draws attention. Observers start asking themselves why you didn't act. The answer is worse for them than if you had. It suggests potential. It suggests that if you wanted to leverage that gap, you could. There's also power in the subtlety. You didn't need to broadcast your understanding. You didn't need to make anyone aware of your knowledge. The mere fact that you could see and resist creates a ripple effect. People start realizing that you're operating on a different wavelength, one that they can't easily measure or predict. That awareness forces them to watch more closely because it introduces uncertainty. They have to account for what you know, what you choose to act on, and what you might do in the future. Your restraint communicates something even louder than action: control. You're not impulsive, you're not reactive, you're deliberate. And when someone high up notices that kind of capability, fixation begins. They don't just see what you do, they see what you could do, and that potential is more compelling and concerning than any single achievement. You became a silent benchmark of calculated power, and once that is registered, it is nearly impossible to ignore. Number 8. You attracted attention without chasing it. There's a rare quality in people who draw focus naturally, without asking for it, without performing or over-explaining. You didn't create a spectacle. You didn't position yourself at the center of every conversation or constantly signal your presence. Yet results, behavior, and decisions around you demanded notice. That kind of organic attention is both magnetic and unsettling to those observing from above, because it can't be controlled or predicted. Most people chase visibility like it's a currency. They network aggressively, broadcast achievements, and maneuver for recognition. You didn't. Your work, your ideas, and your approach spoke for themselves. The outcome wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. And that quiet magnetism forces a different kind of awareness in powerful minds. They aren't just noticing you, they're recalculating how influence is arriving at them without the usual signals, and that sparks fixation. The intrigue lies in what they can't immediately measure. They see the results, but not the effort, the thought process, or the restraint behind it. They see impact without ego. That combination is rare and makes observers reassess everything they thought they knew about the environment. If someone can influence without seeking validation, without lobbying for credit, they are effectively operating outside the normal expectations of power. That unpredictability is what keeps attention fixed. What makes it even more potent is that this kind of attention builds silently over time. People begin to track patterns, notice repetition, and anticipate behavior because they know it matters, even if you haven't made it obvious. The more consistent and controlled your approach, the more your presence registers in the minds of those who need to understand it. You didn't chase notice, yet you became unavoidable. That's the difference between being loud and being significant. People at the top can ignore noise, but they can't ignore consistent, silent influence that changes outcomes. Once someone recognizes this about you, they can't look away. Your presence becomes a point of reference, a pattern to monitor, and a factor in decisions long after you thought they weren't paying attention. Number 9, you asked questions that shifted the room. The most powerful kind of influence isn't always about giving answers. It's about asking the right questions. You didn't dominate discussions or demand attention with statements. Instead, you asked questions that forced people to pause, reconsider, and sometimes rethink what they thought was settled. Those questions weren't loud or flashy, but they carried weight because they revealed gaps in understanding and highlighted assumptions that everyone else had quietly accepted. That's the kind of subtle power that makes people at the top start watching more closely. Most questions people ask are transactional. They clarify, confirm, or seek permission. Yours weren't. They challenged the frame without appearing confrontational. They shifted perspectives quietly, steering decisions and conversations without needing to control them overtly. That ability to redirect thought without asserting dominance is rare, and it catches attention because it can't be easily labeled or countered. You weren't trying to prove yourself, but the room adjusted to you anyway. That adjustment is exactly what triggers fascination in observers. They notice that your input doesn't just participate, it shapes the environment. The power lies in precision. Your questions pinpointed issues that matter, exposed inconsistencies, and reframed discussions in ways that left others recalculating their positions. People noticed not only the questions themselves, but the timing, the insight behind them, and the restraint with which you delivered them. It's a combination that signals awareness, strategic thinking, and silent authority, all without a single raised voice. This kind of impact is hard to ignore because it doesn't fade after the meeting ends. The questions linger in people's minds, influencing decisions and shaping perspectives. Observers begin to track your thought process, trying to anticipate what you'll notice next, how you might influence other situations, and where your understanding might stretch beyond theirs. You didn't need to dominate the conversation to change it. By simply asking the right questions at the right moment, you became a pivot point, a force that alters outcomes quietly but profoundly. That subtlety, intelligence, and influence are exactly why someone high up becomes fixated. They see that your mind moves in ways their own system didn't account for, and once that is recognized, you cannot be unseen. Number 10. You operate without emotional debt. Most people carry invisible chains, obligations of gratitude, loyalty, or approval that subtly influence every decision they make. They tiptoe around expectations, hoping to stay in favor, to avoid conflict, or to secure recognition. You don't. You operate without those chains. Your decisions aren't clouded by the need to repay someone or appease a system. That independence is immediately noticeable, and it's the kind of quality that makes people at the top stop and take careful note. When you act from clarity rather than obligation, your moves are predictable only in outcome, not in motive. You don't overcomplicate actions to satisfy anyone. You don't wait for validation before making a choice. You don't bend under pressure because someone else's approval is required. That kind of freedom is rare, and it disrupts expectations. People who rely on patterns of emotional compliance start to realize that you can't be controlled through the usual levers: praise, recognition, or subtle pressure. That makes your presence both intriguing and, in some ways, unsettling. The quiet power in this approach is undeniable. Emotional debt often clouds judgment, slows progress, and makes people dependent on the opinions of others. You sidestep all of that. You act decisively, with focus and authority, because your loyalty is to results, clarity, and principle, not to the emotional expectations of the hierarchy around you. That clarity gives you influence that is hard to track, but impossible to ignore. Those observing notice because your independence highlights the predictability of everyone else. Your restraint and self-reliance become benchmarks they didn't plan for, and they begin tracking you more closely. Every choice you make carries weight because it comes from a place of unclouded judgment. Operating without emotional debt doesn't just make you effective, it makes you a pivot point in the room. Your decisions ripple outward in ways that can't be manipulated through obligation. People at the top see it, understand it, and can't stop analyzing it. That's why fixation begins. Your freedom to act, your refusal to be indebted, signals capability and power that others measure themselves against. And once they notice, you can't be unseen. Number 11. You noticed what others normalized. Most people move through systems without truly seeing them. They accept inefficiencies, overlook inconsistencies, and rationalize dysfunction as just how things are. That's how organizations, hierarchies, and networks survive, through collective blind spots. You didn't follow that pattern. You saw the gaps, the flaws, and the invisible rules everyone else had silently agreed to. That ability to perceive what's normalized makes you stand out because it signals awareness, discernment, and a refusal to settle for mediocrity. What makes this so compelling to someone high up is the clarity it exposes. When you recognize what's wrong or overlooked without needing it spelled out, it highlights the quiet assumptions that govern the system. You didn't have to speak loudly or call anyone out. Simply by operating with full awareness, by not accepting the accepted, you disrupt the status quo. That quiet disruption draws attention because it exposes the vulnerabilities and blind spots that people in authority depend on others to ignore. Your insight doesn't just make you observant, it makes you influential. Decisions, actions, and outcomes begin to shift around your presence, even subtly. Others notice that you understand the rules and the exceptions, the patterns and the cracks. That combination is rare. Most people either follow without question or rebel without understanding. You neither blindly conform nor recklessly challenge. You see clearly and move accordingly. The fixation begins because seeing what others normalize implies potential. If you chose to act against the blind spots you've identified, you could change systems quietly but profoundly. People at the top notice this potential and can't stop considering its implications. They track your actions, trying to understand how far your awareness reaches and what it might mean for outcomes they thought were secure. Noticing what others normalize is subtle power. It's the difference between participating in a system and understanding it deeply. Once that awareness is recognized, your presence becomes significant, your patterns worth monitoring, and your potential impossible to ignore. You've become someone who operates above the accepted baseline, and that makes you unforgettable in the minds of those who hold influence. Number 12. Your growth didn't match the timeline they expected. In any structured system, people are measured against timelines. Promotions, achievements, and milestones are expected to unfold in predictable stages. Most people rise according to these schedules, and those in charge rely on them to maintain order and predictability. You didn't follow that pattern. You grew faster, reached further, or achieved results ahead of schedule. That kind of accelerated progression catches attention because it disrupts the assumptions about how success should unfold. Your progress wasn't flashy or loud, but it was undeniable. People above you began to notice not because you demanded recognition, but because your results appeared before they expected them. That early arrival is alarming to those who manage systems built on predictability. It signals that you're operating on your own timeline and that your trajectory might outpace their ability to control, contain, or categorize you. The subtlety of your growth amplifies the impact. You didn't announce your wins or compete for attention. You simply advanced while others measured you against a slower, conventional curve. That discrepancy between expectation and reality forces those observing to pay attention. They start recalculating what they thought they knew about your capacity, your ambition, and the potential influence you could have if your growth continues unchecked. Unexpected progress also challenges hierarchy quietly but powerfully. Systems thrive on predictability, and people who exceed it reveal weaknesses in how authority, influence, and reward are allocated. Your acceleration makes observers question how you are achieving results, what drives you, and how far your abilities can extend. It creates a quiet tension because you are both within the system and operating outside its predictable constraints. Ultimately, growth that defies expected timelines is a signal of potential that can't be ignored. It shows that you aren't bound by conventional rules or measured by conventional markers. Once someone high up notices that your trajectory doesn't align with their expectations, fixation begins. They start tracking, analyzing, and anticipating your moves, because someone who surpasses timelines quietly, steadily, and effectively becomes a force to be understood. and they can't afford to look away. Number 13. You're not trying to replace anyone, but you could. Most people who stand out are noticed because they push, compete, or challenge those above them. You didn't. You moved forward with focus, competence, and clarity, without signaling ambition to overtake anyone or disrupt anyone's position. That's what makes your presence quietly alarming to someone high up. You're not overtly a threat, yet the potential is obvious. Observers can see that if a gap ever appeared, you would fit seamlessly, and that possibility is far more unsettling than blatant aggression. Your power lies in restraint. You operate independently, making decisions and producing results without stepping on toes or seeking validation. People often mistake aggression for capability, but you demonstrate that influence and competence don't require confrontation. That subtlety forces observers to pay attention because your strength isn't performative, it's inherent. You show that authority and impact can exist without drama, and that makes your trajectory unpredictable. If you chose to claim a position, no one would be able to argue with the logic of it. The quiet tension you create is unavoidable. Those above notice because potential is as important as action. They see that you have the skill, insight, and composure to excel at higher levels. You're not actively destabilizing the hierarchy, but you've revealed that it could be easily filled by someone with the right awareness and capability. That kind of latent threat demands attention because it can't be ignored, regulated, or discounted. Being capable without ambition to displace others also communicates confidence. You don't need permission or approval to exist effectively within the system. You don't need to push boundaries aggressively to prove value. That makes your influence durable, your presence calculated, and your potential undeniable. In essence, you're a silent benchmark. People above you see both what you are doing and what you could do, and that duality creates a fascination they can't shake. You're a presence that doesn't demand focus, but commands it, simply because the system recognizes that if you ever chose to act differently, it would have to adjust entirely around you. That is why they can't stop watching. Number 14. They realized you're still becoming. What grabs attention at the highest levels isn't just what you've done. It's what you're clearly capable of becoming. People above you can see the trajectory, the potential, the unfolding skill set that hasn't yet reached its peak. That's far more compelling than any achievement you've already completed. They recognize that you're not a finished product, and that ongoing growth makes you unpredictable, expansive, and impossible to fully measure or contain. You carry an energy that suggests exponential development. Every decision, every action, and every result hints at capability that continues to expand. Unlike someone who has plateaued, you don't fit neatly into expectations, and that unsettles observers because it disrupts the systems they rely on to categorize, control, or predict influence. The you they see today is only a fraction of what you might be tomorrow, and that potential keeps their attention fixed. What makes this recognition so powerful is the combination of restraint and momentum. You're not flaunting progress or broadcasting ambition, but growth is evident through results, perception, and influence. People above you begin to track your trajectory, calculating how far it could extend if left unchecked. Every subtle improvement, every refined skill, every intelligent move reinforces the sense that you are evolving faster than their models account for. The intrigue lies in anticipation. They don't just evaluate what you have done. They are forced to anticipate what you could do next. Your potential becomes a variable they can't ignore, a factor in their planning, decisions, and strategies. It's a slow, quiet form of fixation that grows with each stage of your development. Being recognized as still becoming means that you hold space beyond the present. You are no longer measured only by current results, but by the promise of what you could achieve. That promise carries weight because it introduces uncertainty into otherwise stable hierarchies. Once someone high up notices that your growth isn't capped, that you're constantly evolving, they cannot stop watching. Your journey has only just begun, and the awareness of what you might become is more captivating than anything you've already accomplished. Everything we've explored reveals a single, undeniable truth. You've become a person who cannot be ignored. From breaking the predictable patterns that others rely on, to solving problems without permission, advancing without visible leverage, and thinking faster than your position allows, you've quietly but unmistakably demonstrated a kind of power that commands attention. You made competence look effortless, influenced outcomes without needing proximity, and exposed weaknesses without exploiting them. You attracted notice naturally, shifted conversations with precise questions, and operated without emotional debt. You observed what others normalized, grew ahead of expectations, and proved you could rise without trying to replace anyone. And above all, those who are watching recognize that you are still becoming, a force continuously unfolding, expanding, and reshaping what's possible. Every point we've covered builds the same conclusion. Your presence, your mind, and your actions carry weight far beyond what most people realize. You aren't just functioning within a system. You are quietly redefining it. You've become a focal point in the minds of those who measure influence, track patterns, and anticipate potential. That fixation is not about vanity or ego. It's about undeniable capability, relentless growth, and subtle authority that leaves observers no choice but to pay attention. You have revealed that true impact doesn't require shouting, chasing recognition, or forcing compliance. It arrives naturally when skill, restraint, clarity, and foresight converge. If this resonated with you, don't just take it in, share it. Comment your thoughts below, like if you found these insights valuable, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content that cuts deeper than the surface. Share this with someone who needs to see it and join the conversation, because the journey to understanding power, influence, and presence is just getting started. Stay awakened, chosen ones.